and there's going to be a lot of information that will be thrown at you very quickly. Don't worry, this is a lot of stuff that took me a long time to process through myself, and none of you want to know how long ago that was. I know at least a couple people in this room will be like, yep, I remember that time. Because I graduated before all of you were born. Students, obviously. That being said, if it will go over to it. Boom. Hi.
Hi.
That was nice. I am Daniel Klem. I am youth pastor for the church next door. Not next door to this building. It is the name of the church. This is God 101. Does God exist? And as we get into this, I will remind you once again, there's lots of big topics in this. And I even trimmed this down and made it as simple as I could so that even my 6th graders in my youth group can understand what I'm saying. That being said, be ready. Because what if I said, in complete seriousness, God does not exist? What would you say?
You'd be wrong.
How do you know that?
I captain.
Does anybody know Latin? Because it comes from the Latin word existere, which means to come out of, step out of, come forth from. Did God come from something or someone else? According to the Christian tradition, God has always existed. How do we know? The Bible tells us so. Therefore, God does not exist because he did not come from something else. That being said, I'll also say, just kidding, because exist means to be. And like God said to Moses from the burning bush, his name is I am, which means he is. He is being. You cannot get more is than God. Therefore, let's get into what we can really know. Because, can we really know God exists? Is there any evidence for God? Yes. But can we even know anything at all? Because we tend to have two major fallacies that come about. The fallacy of infinite regress, which is that thing that it goes on and on and on. And the ancient Indian proverb becomes, according to an interview from just this past 50 years, the earth sits on the back of 4 elephants, and each of those 4 elephants stand on the back of other elephants. And when does it stop? Well, it's actually elephants all the way down. This is an infinite regress. It is something you can never get to the end to. It becomes infinite. The other one is getting there. The other one is circular reasoning. You're saying, we know this because of that. Well, how do you know that? Well, because of this. So they keep bouncing off of each other. The thing is, circular reasoning is not always a fallacy. You must always have some starting point. This is something we know. So we have to start with, what is faith? Because all worldviews deal with faith. Every single one has faith and reasoning. And we see evidence of this all the time. Because, let's look at evolutionary theory for just a moment. How did life come to be? Thing is, we have never been able to, in a lab, prove life comes from non-life. And yet, it had to have happened. How do we know? Because we're here. And what do most people people who believe in evolution say, well, it may not have started here on Earth, but it may have been seeded from another place. All of a sudden, we're in that infinite regression. We're going to hold on to the end. So, they have faith that it started somehow. But how do we define faith? Is it blind faith, or is it something different? We have blind faith, that is, we believe it because I don't care about your evidence, I'm going to believe it. But we also have true faith, I believe it because I have seen the evidence. So we have to deal with now, what is evidence? Well, according to our friends at Merriam-Webster, evidence is an outward sign, an indication, something that furnishes proof. It is testimony. Usually this is in regards to a court case, to being arrested and put on trial. And we can even see it as someone who bears witness, especially during prosecution, but not always. But this tells us, then, that evidence should be testable, observable, and or confirmable. And how do we know that this works? We see it all the time. We call it the scientific method. And we have all of these things that we put faith in and claim it's because of evidence. But we have to ask ourselves, what is gravity? We know what gravity does, but even NASA scientists will tell you, we don't know how it works. We can give you explanations, we can show you math that proves that it works, but we don't understand how it works. And we even know all of the different ways bicycles stay upright. To the point, you can push a bicycle and it will stay up on its own without a rider on it. And if you nudge it slightly, it'll swerve, but stay upright. And they can tell you all the different ways a bicycle stays up, but they cannot tell you why all those different ways work at the same time. We have faith that it works because we see it. This leads us then to ask the question, can we scientifically measure science? Do we know what science is? We actually know that science comes from the Latin word for knowledge. And science itself is a process, a way we learn and gain knowledge. We even have a quote from Bishop Wilson where he tells us the point of Christianity is not to prove to people who don't care or who don't want to learn. Rather, we're willing to point out evidence so that those who are willing to learn can learn. And Timothy Keller even reminds us that Christians do not claim that their faith gives them omniscience or absolute knowledge of reality. Only God has that. Rather, we believe that only Christians can account for knowledge and that we can know truth. Therefore, can we scientifically test science? No. But we can use it to learn things. We can see all of the evidence. So, what kind of evidence do we have to deal with? Well, there's two major worldviews that we will focus on. That will be naturalism. The universe is all that there is. We are contained in this little box, and there's nothing outside the box. And the other one is theism. That says there is a being outside of the universe who did it all. We see that naturalism believes that nature is all there is, and Dr. Henry Morris even reminds us that science is typically understood to be rational, causal, and unified, but even beyond that, it is naturalistic. Starting with the premise, there is nothing outside the box. There is no God. But that is not the way it should be. Even Isaac Asimov, a great researcher and science fiction author, was able to point out that science is often emotional. And that comes down to being made in God's image. But that's not the point of this talk today. So we need to remember everybody approaches science and other facts with bias. The question is, which bias do you follow? Do you follow the bias that starts with, we're not even going to look at certain understandings of the evidence? We're going to exclude some evidence? Or is it a better bias to believe it is possible there's something else out there? I even heard just this week a scientist who became a Christian because he went, why do we say there's nothing else outside? And it's fun to think that it led him to come to faith in Christ. Because we know that the current understanding of science arbitrarily eliminates certain answers before the game starts. Many scientists and historians must come up with conclusions that leave the supernatural out of the picture because their philosophy demands it. A theist, on the other hand, not an atheist, is not so encumbered. We are more willing to admit there's something we don't understand, something we can't see. Let's see if we can point to it. Therefore, Christians are less biased toward the evidence in general. I'm going to be saying a lot of generalities. We all know no two people think exactly alike. So as we move forward, we see Charlie Campbell with his famous quote, "For me it is more reasonable to believe based on the laws of logic, as well as the observable scientific evidence that God exists, rather than to believe what the atheist believes, that nothing times nobody equals everything we see in the universe." And isn't it interesting to think that all of the first scientists were Christians? Because they believed in an orderly God. Therefore, his creation should be orderly. Why did they believe this? Because their Bible told them about creation, and that God's invisible attributes have been visible ever since the creation of the world, so that anybody who does not believe in God is without excuse. And we call this general revelation. Anybody has access to this. And we will get into a little bit of special revelation this evening, because we believe the Bible was specially revealed to us. So as we move forward, we will be looking at 3 clues in particular that help prove the existence of God. The first one, cosmology or cosmogony. This means there was a first supernatural cause. The universe does exist. We will look at physics, the fine-tuning of the universe, and biological information. Between these 3 things, we should have enough conclusive evidence to prove God exists. So we start with a fine-tuned cosmology. What does this mean? Cosmogony is the study of ideas about the origin of the cosmos. It's closely related to cosmology, which is the study of the cosmos in all its aspects. The cosmos itself, in the simplest terms, is space, mass, and time working together in all of its arrays of complex systems, showing God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter, in the beginning, time. And in 1979, William Lane Craig released his thesis called the Kalam Cosmological Argument, based on an Arabic word for knowledge. What does this mean? It really comes down to a syllogism, which is 3, usually, points. That here is a major truth. We believe something that corresponds to this truth. Therefore, this thing is true. His argument, therefore, was everything that exists has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. If we dig down into this and go a few steps further, we see it as something exists. Nothing does not produce something. We have never been able to prove this in a laboratory. Therefore, the universe must have come from something that always existed, leaving 2 options. It's either the universe itself, or something outside of the universe. What gets interesting as we deal with this is, if the universe were infinite, we could never arrive at today. And the reason is because if you don't have a beginning, time itself breaks down. How can you add to something that just is? And it means there's no yesterday because we can't progress to tomorrow, which therefore means there's also no today. And then math itself breaks down because infinity doesn't add or take away from itself. And then it gets super crazy because you can add infinities and multiply infinities. And you're like, what? But you just said you can't do things with infinities? Like, that's not what I said. The universe is infinite. The math breaks down. Therefore, we see time is not an illusion. It is something that does exist. Man, that word keeps coming up. And we know this because entropy helps prove it's true. Why does entropy prove it's true? Because we see things like the motion of galaxies and the second law of thermodynamics. Things break down over time. If things break down, it means they had to have started somewhere. Otherwise, if things always break down, you eventually run out of things. So why do we have a universe of anything if everything breaks down? We see how this works because of gravity. Keep bringing that up. That we don't understand. That helps break things up. And we know gravity is affected by things like speed of light, speed itself, and even light is affected by time. So we keep seeing all of these things that tell us there must be some sort of eternal power that is uncaused, and it must be personal because people exist. I know this is a deep thing that we could get into during Q&A or some other time, but we just need to remember that the most basic scientific principle and the criterion that governs all human experience is the law of causality. Something causes something else. But if we don't have an initial cause, we're in that infinite regression loop again and again. And since we know the universe began, and we know that nothing happens in isolation, when we try to trace an event to its cause or causes, we find we never seem to reach a stopping point. The cause of an event itself must have been caused by a prior cause or be infinite. Therefore, the universe itself is proof of God's existence. Why? Because it all has to work in some fashion. So let's look at the fine-tuning of the universe.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life could exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be light prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be light permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a light prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a light permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
So we see a finely tuned universe. Some even suggest it might be a simulation. What does a simulation imply then?
There has to be Wi-Fi.
That there has to be Wi-Fi. Or that somebody made it. So we see, contrary to popular arguments, that there is definitely a beginning to our universe. It is so finely tuned that even a severely minor change would mean at best no life, and at worst, no universe. Even Christians get made fun for discussing elephants all the way down when that's exactly what a multiverse does. And it's fun to think about the gravitational constant was off by 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, 1 with 60 zeros after it. Our universe would fall apart. If it was expanding too quickly or too slowly by a difference of 1 in 10 followed, or to the 120th, 1 followed by 120 zeros, it would all fall apart. It's estimated there are 10 to the 80th atoms in the universe. That's less than the cosmological constant variable. Why do I bring all of this up? Because not only is it finely tuned, but we know we can see some other things. So while we see a universe that must be designed and is finely tuned, what we also see is that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. Richard Dawkins, famous atheist. Or Francis Crick, somebody who helped with the discovery of DNA. Biologists must constantly keep in mind what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. And while we could talk about all sorts of different things, we're going to focus on one important part of biology. But first, we ask, what do scientists search for as evidence for life in the universe?
That it can be created without nothing, or with nothing.
They do kind of look for that. Thing they actually look for, anybody heard of SETI? Search for extraterrestrial intelligence? How do you know if you found extraterrestrial life? Information. Because information does not arise naturally. It is developed by a mind. Well, let me ask you something. What do we call this? DNA. This is information. It tells cells not only how to grow, but how to repair themselves, how to reproduce themselves, how to turn themselves on and off. And we like to think that this happened naturally, even though Francis Crick, remember that guy? He said that when we discovered this, the odds of it happening naturally within the time frame we have works out to be 1 in 10 to the 2 billionth power. How many seconds have been in the universe?
I'm guessing a lot.
10 to the 20th. 10 to the 20th seconds, and we have an odds of 1 in 10 to the 2 billionth that it happened naturally. That DNA could form without a mind behind it. Well, what did I just put up on the screen? Binary. What is binary? It's a code made up of 2 characters, binary, that makes all things work. From our cell phones to our laptops, anything electronic. And it took us decades to develop this. DNA has 4 characters that supposedly happened by chance in a universe that is 100,000 times younger than the odds of it happening naturally. Oh, I went too fast. That binary actually says God exists. Just thought I'd put that out there. DNA has not told us that technically, but it is information. It points to a creator. However, we have to deal with the ultimate proof, which really comes down to Comparing naturalism and intelligent design, one more time, both require faith because we cannot observe the past. However, we can see what is more probable if we can just think fourth dimensionally. Yes, I love Back to the Future. Everybody else should too. Let's start by asking what is supernatural. And we have Abdu Murray who tells us we need more than naturalistic sciences. We cannot derive meaning, human value, and quality from a laboratory. We need something outside of the natural to help explain this. So then, sorry it's small on the screen. Is there something outside of space and time? And the more we understand about the cosmos, the bigger and more intricate the design is observed. We have to conclude there is a God that is incredibly detailed, unfathomably large, and surpassingly beautiful. So let's ask ourselves then, what would a higher being be like? Let's see how an atheist, somebody who wished to destroy religion and spirituality altogether, explains it.
In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say that space is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about? That's not that we are perfectly flat. I mean, absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flat land. Land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, we all scurry about. We can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know as flatlanders about left, right, we know about forward, back, but we have never heard of up, down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter his house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. Hello, says the three-dimensional creature. How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension. Well, poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his inside, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in flatland only partially, only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So, when the three-dimensional creature first reaches flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen. We'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pen, placing that image in flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion to be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. It's terribly confused. It's utterly outside inside his fellow flat creatures. He has seen flatlands from a perspective no one has ever seen it before to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides an incidental benefit, a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, for heaven's sake, what's happened to you? And the poor square has to say, well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up. And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, well, show us, where is that very dimension? Point to it. And the poor square will be unable to comply. What may be more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension?
Which I would love to let you guys listen to. It's fascinating and intriguing. But the real point of this is, here's an atheist who describes somebody hearing a voice, seemingly from nowhere, who can transport somebody to a different plane of existence and can appear inside of a closed-off room. Doesn't this sound like Samuel, who heard God speaking to him in the middle of the night? Or prophets who find themselves in God's throne room? A mystical higher place. Or what about prophets making over 100 prophecies about one who would come, who would save people from their sin? Or this person, Jesus of Nazareth, who was born the way prophesied, lived a life performing miracles and pointing people to God, and then said he would be killed and raised again to life, all according to those prophecies. And what if he not only did that, but after raising from the dead on the first day of the week, while the disciples were locked in a room for fear of the Jews, he appeared amongst them? We just had an atheist explain how it's possible, and yet he somehow missed it. Hopefully, you don't miss it, because the ultimate proof for the Christian is the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus claimed to be God, said, I'm going to die and rise again. And that will prove what I said is true. And if he is not raised from the dead, we as Christians are most above all to be pitied, because there isn't a resurrection from the dead. And what does all of this have to do with God? I have to ask you some pretty important questions. Did God have to create anything, let alone us? No. In Acts chapter 17, Paul reminds everybody he's in no need for anything, and yet he created from two people all the nations on the earth. Did God have to save us? Did he have to become a man at all? No, and in fact the flood shows us this, and even God saying about the Israelites during the Exodus, I'm going to destroy them because they have made me angry. And Moses says, please don't do it, God, remember your promises. What this tells us then is that God, in his freedom, chose to create us. And even though we have spit in his face, he chose to become one of us and save us. And then, because of that, we can find freedom in him from all of our fears, all of our failures, all of our problems. And he then invites us into the loving relationship of the Trinity of God. That is the presentation for you today. We can now go into a time of questions. Did anybody tell I was really tired?
Thank you, Daniel. So, Daniel, thank you. That was very helpful, and I'm sure there's some questions out here. Titus, you want to come on up? So Titus is youth pastor at Willow Hills, and so he, Daniel, and myself will be here to answer questions. I can throw some questions out there, but I want to see any of you have questions before I throw them some questions. Yeah, Seth.
When he was talking about circular reasoning, what was the other fallacy that he was also talking about?
Infinite regression.
That one. And how you said that other religions use that and it's not true. However, that fallacy could also be true because God's age could go infinitely back.
So infinite regression will always be a fallacy. The circular reasoning is the one that can be true, because the infinite regression one is you can keep on going forever. And the atheist argument is always, well, if God created everything, who created God? Well, nobody. He always existed. The circular reasoning becomes okay when you say God created everything, and we know because he told us, which means we know God did it because of God. But we have examples of how this is true all the time.
Who's the one? Hold on, I'm going to remember it. Kottman.
Eli Whitney. We can say Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. You can say, okay, but who invented Eli Whitney? Well, he was born. But he's still the one who created it. So it doesn't matter where he came from. He's the one who made it. So you can get right back into it. It doesn't matter where he came from. But with God, it does matter. He came from nowhere. Technically, he just is.
Any other questions? Sadir.
I've heard a lot of atheists claim that because there is that 1 in 10 to the 2 billion chance that it necessarily could have happened over the millions or billions of years that the earth has existed, that the universe has existed, that like spontaneously came about. How would you rebut that argument?
Okay, can you ask that question again?
Yeah, so I think just the fact that there is a chance that life spontaneously came about through spontaneous generation without a cause, then it must have necessarily happened if given enough time, basically.
Yeah, so like I think it was Stephen Hawking who said that because gravity exists, the universe can and will create itself, right? And so that's, I think, a summary of kind of like what the argument that you're referring to, right? Except, I don't know that they even have an example that they can even point to, because we don't actually have examples of anything spontaneously coming out of nothing. Because if it was true, then we would see that happen more often, right? And so it's like, and sometimes, and I cannot remember what it's called, but there is a thing where they will talk about in the vacuum of space that there will be things that will come into seemingly into existence. But even that is not. Even those examples are not examples of something coming from nothing. That is an example of something coming from a vacuum, which is not nothing. It's just the fluctuation of gravity and whatnot. So even that, would you explain that?
Quantum mechanics is fun and it actually helps people of faith, Christian faith in particular, even more than the atheist. But it really is it's a God of the gaps argument. And, well, we know it's happened because God did it. Well, their response is, we know it happened because it's here. And that's why we come back to, we all rely on faith. We can't test that the universe exploded out of nothing or something close to nothing. Lawrence Krauss had to redefine nothing to make a universe come from nothing. If you have to redefine your words, it means you have a bad argument.
Does that help?
Yes. Thank
you. There's an aspect to where, with those kind of numbers, 1 in 10 to the 2 billion power, it is a statistical impossibility. So to say that there's an outside chance, that is literally the definition of grasping at straws. there's an outside chance that out of so many possibilities, something like that could potentially be out there. It's not the kind of thing you want to take to Vegas.
No.
Not that you want to go there anyway, but
Christians call it a miracle.
Anyone else? Jaden.
When it comes to talking about the different dimensions, are you saying that God might exist in like the fourth or fifth dimension or some higher dimension, or that he's outside of dimensions himself because he created them?
My argumentation has come from the dimensionality argument that if he's actually dimensional in any way, absolute lowest he would be is fifth dimensional. I like the 9 and 10 dimensional arguments because I used to have a video I would put in this presentation where somebody explains the 10 dimensions, and if a being was in the 10th dimension, he could think of, create, manipulate, therefore control, and even destroy all possible timelines and universes, which sounds like God.
In response to that, then, who created the dimensions?
That is why I say at best he's really a 10th dimensional being. I like the 9-dimensional model, which is the most prolific amongst mathematicians, because then he'll be what is above the 9th dimension, and therefore creates dimensionality.
Okay. So God is outside of anything that is made. He pre-exists everything that is made.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, is like trying to see if you were saying he's like within a higher dimension, or if he himself is the highest dimension, you know, with all other dimensions infinitely going down.
I think we would say, I don't know a lot about dimensions, but I think we would say whatever dimensions exist because he made them, and therefore he is beyond them.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Okay.
Yeah, good question. Anyone else? Zach.
So when it comes to God, there's basically no chance, right? There's just no chance of let's just say God's real name was Jeff, and there were a bunch of people. It was just chance that he was chosen or something like that. Like, there's no chance when it comes to God, right?
So in other words, the things that God did, he did, are you asking, he did it with absolute purpose and certainty, or?
Like, anything that has always existed, there's no chance of that. Like, there's no chance of it not happening.
Yeah, like, I am the Lord your God, there's no other God beside me. Before anything was, I am. I'm the one who creates and destroys. Yeah. So, no other option. And we're even joking around about how God must be Calvinist because he has to be. And don't worry, we're not taking a side into Calvinism or Arminianism debate.
Let me ask a question. I'll throw it to Titus. So we looked at the existence of God from a scientific standpoint. So proving God exists from science. What is another way that we would show that God exists?
Yeah, so C.S. Lewis made famous an argument, the moral argument, right? So like, because we have things like morality, there was a quote that I was looking at while we were thinking about this breakout session, that I can't think of the man's name, but this atheist who was talking about if morals exist, if you believe that murder is wrong, right? That morality, there's moral there, there's right and there's wrong. If morals exist, then there has to be a God, right? Because what he's saying is that if we believe that there are morals that everyone can agree with, like killing is wrong, stealing is wrong, and those kinds of things, then what we're referring to is this universal law. And so in Christianity, we talk about how God is the moral lawgiver. If there is a law that's placed on our hearts that says there's right and wrong, then there has to be a higher standard that gives us that law, that places that law on all of our hearts. And so we use the moral argument because it tells us that there is a standard, and God sets that standard. And so you can look at morality as another way to say that God exists without using science, though science is a great tool.
Yeah, that's a really good one to think about when, especially in our generation, where people say, I'm going to live my truth, and I'm going to set my own morality, and there is a standard moral. One question I've asked people before who come with this moral relativism is it ever okay to torture babies for fun?
No.
And people can debate, is it okay to lie? Is it not okay to lie? Or at different times. But we should all be able to say it's never okay to torture babies for fun. Unless someone's a sociopath. We should all be able to agree on that. But then the question is, why? Why would we agree that that is wrong? I mean, we know it's wrong, but why is that a universal standard? And it's because there must be one who is given that standard. And so there is a right and a wrong. There is something that is objective truth.
I think another thing we can look at, think through is that if God exists, right, then we would expect things like the miraculous and the supernatural to take place, right? If God exists as a spiritual being, then we would expect these things to happen. And Daniel ended his presentation with the resurrection of Jesus. So if God exists, miracles like the resurrection and all the other miracles in the Bible then make sense in place of a God. Without God, those things don't make sense either, right? They would be impossible. So, looking at like the resurrection, eyewitness accounts, and those kinds of things also give evidence towards his existence.
That's very true. Yeah.
So we say like nothing can't produce something, which like is true, but like, and like I know like God never like came from nothing because like he didn't like come from anything, but like I think of like how to ask this question, but like how, like if nothing can't produce something, then like
how did God come?
Like,
how does God exist if nothing can?
Yeah, because I know obviously no one created God. God was never created. He was there from like the beginning, but that's just like really hard to like understand.
Yeah, what did God say to the prophets? My ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts. Besides, the heavens are above the earth, which you can understand as the sky, the stretches of the universe, or as far as the place we call heaven is from earth. That's how far beyond us he is. So, as finite beings trying to understand something that is beyond infinite, because we can even count infinities, we could never count God other than 3 in 1.
It is a hard question because I think the Carl Sagan video is kind of helpful in answering this question, because we can't even conceptualize what it must be like to be an all-knowing, all-powerful being with no limitations, who is in all places at all times, in all capacities. And so when we think about God, it is like the ant trying to contemplate the mind of a human being. So what we have to go on is what the Bible says: in the beginning, God. And then we look at all the things that he has made, and we're like, okay, in the beginning, God, he is greater than we are. It's a great question. Any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. So we've had a few from Seth. We'll come to you if there's not another one, but if there's another one, yes?
So is heaven a dimension too?
Is heaven a dimension too?
No, the second dimension is flat. No, I'm kidding. The short answer is sort of.
That's the short one.
Yeah. My favorite definition of heaven is God's presence. Therefore, I would argue it's only dimensional because dimensional beings can exist there. Like angels and glorified humans.
Any others? Yeah, in the back.
You said the first scientists were Christians, correct?
Yep.
So how did it come from the first scientists were Christians to nowadays? Some people argue, mostly scientists argue with the fact of Christianity. How does it come from that to that?
It is actually Christian freedom that allows them to say that. And we have allowed for so much knowledge to come from study that people feel like they don't need something else. And Romans 1 does remind us that it's not that they don't need something else, it's that they convince themselves they don't need something else, or there isn't something else out there to know.
Yeah, and I'm going to answer this in a different way. So, scientists, especially over time, as they're trying to explain things without God. I mean, the simple fact is that it's just pride, right? Like it is, they want to exist without God, and the reason why they would is because if God exists, then they are accountable for everything that He says, right? My pride is the thing that says I don't need your help. Our pride also says I don't need to be dependent on God. And I think that has always been mankind's struggle. So what you're going to find is, especially with guys like Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, and all these others, they're going to try to explain God away as a way to justify their own worldview and to get rid of the fact that they are accountable to something else.
Maybe one more. Yeah.
It's not necessarily off topic, but it's on the same idea. Because I think of why doesn't anybody scientists like ideas, right? They just generalize the idea. So why don't they like the idea of an almighty, obedient God who made you, that loves you, and forgives you for everything you do? And they just can't accept it. They just can't accept the fact that someone loves them like that. That confuses me.
I mean, Romans 1 that was referenced earlier, it's a great place to go. Because people don't want to retain the knowledge of God in their minds. They come up with other hopes. So if God exists, then that means there's someone over us. And that means that we are not sovereign. And we're not in control. We're actually then to submit to the one who made us. And because we, by nature, fallen nature, don't want to submit, we come up with reasons to remove God from the equation. The reason God is beautiful for the Christian is because they have eyes to see His love and His character, and that when God rules over us, it is a generous rule. It's a gracious rule. It's not a totalitarian dictator suppression that a lot of people envisage God to be. And there's a lot of reasons why people have those ideas. But ultimately, it comes down to people don't want to be submitted to a God who is over them.